Good evening, it's me, Drive Ghost. And today, I would like to talk about Quirks, the popular and somewhat iconic power system from My Hero Academia, also known as Boku no Hero Academia. And specifically how some quirks are pretty inconsistent with the established power system. Now, I know on here it does say an inconsistent power system, but that's more so just title flair. Because if I were to name something like, this many quirks that are inconsistent, it wouldn't, have as much, force behind it. It would feel like kind of a stale title, So this is not to bash on My Hero. This is just to establish that some quirks do not fit the original definition that the power system was trying to go by when Horikoshi started writing. Alright, so let's get into it. First, we have to look at what are quirks. Multiple times, quirks have been stated, or implied even, to be biological with no magic mumbo-jumbo involved. This point was hammered in since the beginning of the series, and is even stated on the official wiki, as you can see in this quote here. Now, for the most part, most quirks in the series, especially those introduced in the earlier chapters or episodes, fit the original biological no-magic definition, with quirks like hardening, muscle augmentation, tail, duple arm, etc. being clearly biological, and not too outlandish that you would look at them and say, wait, that's not biological. Like, those ones work absolutely fine. There are even some more outlandish quirks that you could make an argument for. Some quirks like Explosion, which would seem like a more magical ability, have been given an explanation. Katsuki says that he basically sweats nitroglycerin, and we can probably assume that he can just, explode it via some method. I don't remember if that part was explained, but there are others like Overhaul, Decay, or even All for One that you yourself could apply explanations to, even if there aren't sufficient explanations given. We're not explicitly told how they're biological and fit the original definition, but, we could assume with, reasonable levels of assumption. But then, there are others. Ares' Rewind quirk is stated to use some kind of energy which just objectively sounds like some kind of magical spiritual power system like magic or hockey or ki. While the ability it set them back into previous stages could fit with the original definition of quirks, the inclusion of some kind of weird energy that, as far as I know, only her quirk can use makes it sound like a magical power rather than trait. So, just sending something back into, a previous stage or, kind of devolving it, that doesn't sound like too out of the realms of a quirk, but when you start getting, some kind of weird energy involved, then it starts being alright, is this a quirk or is this, a freaking stand ability or something? And then there's Night Eye, who has literally no excuse. Night Eye's quirk is to see the future, which is just very clearly not biological at all. There's no way to excuse foresight as a biological trait when it interacts with time itself by seeing the future. Yeah, he has to, make contact with the person to see their future, but would that make it biological? He's still, interacting with time. He's seeing the future. How is that a biological trait? I can't go down to the zoo and see, oh yeah, these are the freaking chrono newts. They can see the future. And there are even some quirks that don't necessarily seem super magical, doing air quotes, that still don't really make sense as biological abilities. Quirks like cement or earth flow interact with inanimate objects, specifically the ground, in a manner that doesn't seem very realistic for a biological trait. It's like they're earthbenders from Avatar. And even then, earthbenders use, a special energy. They use, their spirits and stuff to manipulate the earth. That's how bending works. It's not exactly magic, but, you get the point. And then there are quirks like Zero Gravity, which could make sense, but for the most part seem just a bit too outlandish to work. we could make explanations for these, but at that point it would feel like stretching. So, in conclusion, Quirks might be kind of inconsistent, but it isn't a bad power system, quite the opposite, in fact. It's just that with the abilities that Horikoshi wanted to include, they couldn't easily be done with the original biological status without going into, like, big explanations and, like, kind of reaching to make excuses as to why, oh, these are biological, so it was better to just, leave it vague. This isn't really a slight against MHA, it's still a very good story, and after all, power systems don't have to be purely biological or realistic. I mean, look at Dragon Ball, look at Naruto, they kind of have a mix of both, but for the most part, they're ridiculous. So MHA at least trying to be grounded is admirable. This video was just to point out that a few of these quirks don't exactly work with the original definition, and that definition would have been a mistake with foresight. No pun intended. And with quirks becoming rapidly more complex since the early days, with like quirk vestiges and stuff like that, and all the stuff with One for All, this could simply be excused by saying, well, humans in the first just didn't understand the nature of quirks very well. We thought they were purely biological, but turns out they're interacting with these, like, forces of energy that we hadn't been able to tap into before. But, yeah, that's, quirks are very good. It's a good power system, but like all power systems, it has a few outliers, let's say. A few things that just don't exactly fit in with the original definition. This happens with a lot of power systems. Like, if you look at a chakra or ki, a lot of times in the later series, especially in their sequel series, they don't necessarily line up perfectly with their original definitions. And that's fine. You don't have to make a power system completely and totally 100% consistent. I don't even think that's possible. Unless it's like a really simplistic and not all that interesting power system. So the point is, having mistakes in your power system is a sign that it's a complex power system and is interesting. This was just to, like I said, just to point out that some quirks don't fit that original definition. But yeah, that's all I had to talk about, and I'll see you next time.